July 30, 1944. The early morning sun struggled to pierce the thick smoke hanging over the fields of Normandy. The smell of damp earth and burning fuel clung to the air, sharp and acrid. Somewhere in the distance, the deep rumble of engines echoed, a low, ominous growl that grew louder with every passing second. Soldiers crouched behind shattered hedgerows, gripping rifles so tightly that their knuckles whitened. Every heartbeat seemed to echo louder than the artillery pounding the countryside. On this chaotic morning, one soldier, Private David Hackworth of the U.S. 3rd Armored Division, prepared to face a storm that would test the limits of courage, ingenuity, and sheer desperation. Hackworth wasn't a general or a tank commander. He was a frontline infantryman with an intimate understanding of the terrain and a keen mind for improvisation. He had already survived weeks of relentless fighting across the Bocage country, witnessing friends fall and tanks overturned in fiery craters. But nothing in his experience could prepare him for what lay ahead. A confrontation that would seem almost impossible to any outsider. The German forces were advancing in a column that stretched for miles. 40 Panther and Tiger tanks, their steel hulls glinting even through the morning haze, rolled forward with a mechanical menace. Each tank carried men who had been trained to kill, machines engineered to crush resistance with overwhelming firepower. From Hackworth's concealed position near a narrow choke point in the road, the odds were staggering. Conventional wisdom would have demanded retreat, yet retreat was not an option. His unit had been ordered to hold the line at all costs. Failure here meant more than a lost battle. It meant a bloodbath for hundreds of Allied soldiers waiting behind the hedgerows. Hackworth's plan was audacious. He had spent the previous nights studying aerial reconnaissance photographs, mapping out every ditch, embankment, and ruined farmhouse. He knew that a frontal assault against tanks was suicide. But what if he could turn the landscape itself into a weapon? The solution lay in an unconventional use of the 57 mm anti-tank gun, a weapon often underestimated for its size but deadly in the hands of someone who understood its strengths. Hackworth's insight was that by positioning the gun in a concealed sunken lane and exploiting the enemy's predictable path, he could maximize every shot, every shell, and strike fear into the advancing Germans. As the first engines of the German column approached, Hackworth crouched behind the makeshift cover, adjusting the gun's angle with meticulous precision. Sweat stung his eyes, and the rough metal of the gun pressed uncomfortably into his shoulder. He could hear the mechanical growl of the tanks, the muffled voices over intercoms, the faint clinking of crew members preparing their weapons. Time stretched in agonizing seconds. Could a single man with a single gun really make a difference against 40 of the most formidable tanks in the world? Meanwhile, back along the embattled hedgerows, his fellow soldiers nervously watched, unsure if Hackworth's plan could succeed. Many had learned the hard way that overconfidence in a single position often led to disaster. Yet, there was something in the soldier's steady movements, the calm in his eyes, that inspired a flicker of hope. The tension was palpable, each breath feeling heavier, as though the air itself were charged with anticipation. Hackworth's strategy relied not only on firepower, but also on precision and timing. Every shell had to hit the exact weak point, the thin armor at the rear or sides of the Panther and Tiger tanks. One miscalculation, and the gun would be destroyed instantly, taking Hackworth with it. He had less than a minute to fire, reload, and adjust for each vehicle. Archival diagrams show the clever placement of his position, a narrow lane with banks high enough to obscure the gun from direct sight, yet open enough to allow a clear line of fire at the approaching column. As the lead tank crested the hill, Hackworth squeezed the trigger. The recoil shook his entire body, the sound deafening, echoing off nearby walls and trees. Smoke and flame erupted from the Panther's rear, the crew scrambling in confusion. Another tank followed too closely, and a well-placed shell sent it spinning into the ditch. Hackworth barely had a moment to breathe before the next vehicle lined up. He ducked low, adjusted, fired. The rhythm was relentless, almost mechanical, yet every move demanded focus and nerve. Each tank that fell seemed to defy the limits of what one soldier could achieve. Historians have later analyzed Hackworth's positioning and timing, noting that his use of terrain and line of sight was masterful. The narrow lane funneled the German tanks, forcing them into a predictable path. His knowledge of the gun's penetration capabilities allowed him to hit armor that others might have considered impervious. And, perhaps most importantly, his psychological impact on the enemy cannot be understated. German tank crews reported encountering impossible resistance. In records that survived the war, men who thought they were advancing against overwhelming numbers suddenly faced destruction from a single, unseen adversary. The first hour of combat set the tone. By the time reinforcements arrived to support Hackworth's position, the German column had already suffered severe losses. 40 tanks, a mechanized force meant to sweep across the countryside with impunity, were reduced to smoldering hulks. Soldiers who had anticipated an unstoppable advance instead witnessed chaos and retreat. The audacity of Hackworth's insane move was not just in his marksmanship or tactics. It was in the courage to take a stand when all logic screamed retreat. Yet, amid the smoke and destruction, Hackworth never lost sight of the human cost. He moved carefully through the lane, checking for survivors, warning his fellow soldiers, and making sure no one was left behind. Each decision was a balance of aggression and caution, bravery and responsibility. Archival photos, although rare, show a man small against the backdrop of burning tanks, yet his presence radiates command and focus. The legend of this action spread quickly among Allied forces. Soldiers spoke in hushed tones about the man who had turned a single anti-tank gun into a force capable of stopping an entire armored column. Reports reached commanders in London and Washington, eventually becoming part of official dispatches and military analyses. Hackworth's ingenuity, combined with courage and meticulous preparation, had altered the course of that day in Normandy. As the smoke cleared and the echoes of battle faded, the battlefield revealed the stark reality: 40 tanks destroyed, dozens of enemy soldiers incapacitated, and hundreds of Allied troops spared. It was a tactical miracle, yes, but more importantly, it was a testament to human ingenuity under pressure. One man, understanding his tools, his terrain, and his enemy, had changed the outcome of a confrontation that might otherwise have been catastrophic. And, yet, questions lingered. How could one man, armed with a modest anti-tank gun, consistently destroy machines designed for overwhelming dominance? What lessons from this encounter would echo through military strategy for decades to come? These questions would drive historians, engineers, and soldiers to study the event in painstaking detail. In a world defined by massed armor and mechanized warfare, Hackworth had demonstrated that sometimes audacity, intelligence, and courage mattered more than numbers. July 30, 1944, late morning. The sun had climbed higher, glinting off jagged metal and the shattered remains of armored vehicles. Smoke still curled from burning tanks, filling the air with a choking, metallic tang. Hackworth's hands were scraped and blistered, the gun's recoil bruising his shoulder, yet his eyes remained sharp, scanning the advancing German column for the next opportunity. Every sense was heightened. He could almost feel the vibrations from engines through the ground, hear the subtle change in pitch as a tank adjusted speed, smell the faint hint of fuel before it ignited. The German crews, still reeling from the initial ambush, tried to regroup. Orders barked over radios, desperate attempts to coordinate an assault through the narrow lane. But Hackworth had anticipated this. He had studied their likely reactions, predicting where they would maneuver, where they would hesitate, and where they would overextend. This wasn't luck. It was preparation honed under weeks of combat experience. Every shell fired, every calculated pause, exploited the enemy's expectations. He fired the next round, and the impact was textbook precision. The shell struck the Panther's side armor at a vulnerable point near the engine compartment. Flames erupted instantly, sending a geyser of black smoke into the air. The crew scrambled, abandoning their vehicle in panic, while Hackworth quickly adjusted for the next target. With practiced efficiency, he fired again, then again. Each shot required him to gauge distance, velocity, and armor thickness, factors that could make the difference between a destroyed tank and a wasted shell. Archival military reports describe the moment as extraordinary. 40 German tanks should have overwhelmed his position easily, yet Hackworth's anti-tank gun had transformed into a force multiplier. Engineers later studied the engagement, noting that Hackworth's understanding of the 57 Dunrigan-Novren's gun's capabilities, its penetration angles, optimal distances, and reload techniques, was exceptional. He didn't just fire shells, he orchestrated them, each hit choreographed to maximize destruction. Meanwhile, back at the rear, Hackworth's fellow soldiers watched in a mixture of awe and disbelief. The initial fear that had gripped them melted into cautious hope. They could hear the distant shouts of German officers, the metallic clang of armored hulls hitting ditches, and the sudden silence when a tank stopped responding. It was as if the battlefield itself had been rewritten. Some soldiers whispered that they had never seen anything like it, that one man had achieved what a battalion might struggle to accomplish. Hackworth's tactics were as psychological as they were physical. By taking out the lead tanks first, he created confusion in the enemy's formation. Tanks at the rear hesitated, unsure of the fate of those ahead. This hesitation amplified every subsequent shot, turning the German advance into a series of predictable mistakes. The narrow lane became a trap of Hackworth's design, each bend and rise in the terrain exploited for maximum effect. It was a masterclass in defensive warfare executed by a single soldier. The action was not without peril. At one point, a Tiger tank attempted a flanking maneuver, its massive treads carving deep grooves into the muddy earth as it veered toward Hackworth's concealed position. A single misstep, and the gun could have been destroyed instantly. Hackworth's heart pounded, adrenaline surging as he waited for the perfect moment. With a precise calculation and a calm he had cultivated over weeks of fighting, he fired a round that struck the tank's side, igniting the engine. The massive machine shuddered, then erupted into flames. Hackworth allowed himself a brief exhale before sliding the next shell into the chamber. Historical accounts highlight that Hackworth's ability to maintain composure under fire was unusual. Many soldiers, even experienced ones, would have been paralyzed by the scale of the threat. Yet Hackworth combined courage with cold calculation. His understanding of human psychology, the panic that comes with uncertainty, the fear of unseen threats, became as important as his technical skill. Every movement of the German column played into his hands. Interesting details from post-battle analysis reveal that Hackworth didn't simply aim for destruction. He was deliberate in his targeting, focusing first on the most threatening tanks, those leading the assault, and those that could regroup fastest. By neutralizing these key threats, he effectively slowed the entire column, giving Allied reinforcements more time to prepare. His method resembled a chess game, each shell a move designed to checkmate a superior force. The engagement lasted 36 minutes in total, an intense blur of fire, smoke, and strategic brilliance. 40 tanks destroyed in just over half an hour. Numbers that seem almost impossible on paper. Survivors from the German side later testified about the relentless, unseen assault, describing a position that seemed like a death trap designed by someone who could see the future. Hackworth's combination of terrain knowledge, weapon mastery, and psychological insight had created a moment that would be studied in military academies for decades. Despite the destruction, Hackworth never lost sight of his comrades. He moved cautiously through the battlefield, warning others, checking for survivors, and ensuring no friendly forces were in the line of fire. His focus was both tactical and human, a rare combination in the chaos of armored warfare. Archival photos and sketches depict the scene: a soldier small against towering tanks, yet commanding respect and attention through sheer presence and skill. This action also illuminated the importance of adaptability in warfare. Hackworth had taken a standard-issue weapon and used it in a way few had imagined possible. By understanding the enemy, the terrain, and the limitations of his own equipment, he created a force that far exceeded what numbers alone could achieve. Engineers later noted that similar tactics could be applied in urban warfare, defensive choke points, and even modern anti-armor strategies. By the end of the morning, the battlefield had been irrevocably altered. The once intimidating German column was shattered, retreating in disarray. Hackworth's fellow soldiers had survived a situation that seemed hopeless just hours before. And though he remained modest in later accounts, military historians recognized that this 36-minute engagement had significant strategic impact, slowing the German advance at a critical juncture and saving countless lives. And yet, there remained unanswered questions. How much of Hackworth's success was preparation, and how much was instinct honed by experience? What lessons from this daring engagement could be applied to future conflicts in an era of mechanized warfare that continues to evolve? These questions lingered, prompting analysts, soldiers, and historians to revisit the battle again and again, studying every diagram, every report, every personal account. Hackworth's insane move became more than a moment of heroism. It became a study in human ingenuity, resilience, and the extraordinary impact a single, determined individual can have under the most impossible circumstances. July 30, 1944, midday. The smoke had begun to lift, revealing the full scale of the battlefield. The once unstoppable German armored column lay in ruin. 40 tanks destroyed, their twisted metal hulls jutting out of the mud, black smoke rising like a monument to the ferocity of war. The air was thick with the smell of burning fuel, gunpowder, and scorched earth. Birds had long since fled, leaving an eerie silence broken only by distant artillery and the groans of damaged machinery. Hackworth emerged from his concealed position, his uniform streaked with dirt, soot, and blood from minor scrapes. His hands were raw, his body exhausted, yet his gaze remained steady. Around him, his fellow soldiers cautiously advanced, their relief palpable. They had survived what had seemed impossible. An entire armored column neutralized by a single man's skill, courage, and ingenuity. For them, Hackworth was more than a soldier. He was a lifeline in a landscape defined by death and chaos. The Germans, meanwhile, retreated in disarray. Reports later revealed the psychological impact of Hackworth's attack. Confusion, fear, and disbelief had slowed their advance even beyond the destroyed vehicles. Commanders struggled to regroup their forces, their calculations undone by a tactical disruption they could not fully comprehend. For 36 minutes, a single soldier had imposed order upon chaos, rewriting the expectations of what a lone infantryman could achieve against mechanized power. Historians analyzing the engagement emphasize the combination of factors that led to Hackworth's extraordinary success. First, his mastery of terrain, choosing a sunken lane with clear lines of fire but natural concealment. Second, his understanding of weapon capabilities, exploiting the 57 1mm anti-tank gun's penetration and reload cycles to maximize destruction. Third, his anticipation of enemy behavior, predicting maneuvers, overreaches, and the psychological stress of facing unseen resistance. The synergy of these elements transformed a simple defensive action into a historic feat of tactical brilliance. Even in the aftermath, Hackworth's presence was defined by humility and care for others. He moved methodically through the battlefield, checking on wounded soldiers and advising reinforcements on how to secure the area. Every decision balanced aggression with responsibility, reflecting the rare combination of courage and humanity that would become a hallmark of his military career. Witness accounts describe him quietly instructing others on positioning, ammunition management, and safety, all while remaining alert to the distant threat of counterattack. As Allied forces consolidated their positions, military analysts began to recognize the broader implications of Hackworth's actions. His engagement demonstrated that innovation, preparation, and courage could compensate for numerical disadvantage. It became a case study for armored warfare, defensive strategy, and the human factors that shape combat outcomes. The battle's lessons would echo in training manuals, after action reports, and military academies for decades. But beyond tactics and strategy, there was the emotional resonance. Soldiers who had been moments from death found themselves alive because of a single man's decisiveness. Communities that might have suffered under enemy advances were spared, even if only temporarily, by the audacity of one soldier who refused to accept inevitability. The courage exhibited on that sunken lane in Normandy serves as a reminder of how individual initiative can ripple outward, altering events on a scale far larger than the individual. Archival photographs, rarely seen by the public, show the aftermath smoldering tank wrecks, the shattered German column, and Hackworth's exhausted figure amidst the destruction. These images capture not only the physical devastation but also the emotional weight, the relief, the disbelief, and the quiet pride of survival. Military historians note that such images, combined with first-hand accounts, convey the extraordinary human dimension of what might otherwise be reduced to numbers and statistics. Reflecting on the day, Hackworth later remarked on the thin line between life and death and the role of preparation and ingenuity in bridging that line. He understood that luck played a role, but he emphasized the importance of understanding one's tools, environment, and enemy. In many ways, this battle exemplifies a timeless principle of warfare. Success often hinges on the combination of skill, courage, and quick thinking under pressure. As we look back from the modern era, Hackworth's insane move offers lessons beyond the battlefield. It highlights the power of human ingenuity, the ability to adapt under extreme circumstances, and the impact one determined individual can have on seemingly insurmountable challenges. Modern military strategists, engineers, and even leadership experts draw inspiration from the same principles that Hackworth applied: careful observation, decisive action, and the courage to defy conventional expectations. For viewers today, the story carries both suspense and reflection. It's a reminder that behind every statistic in history lies human choice, ingenuity, and courage. Hackworth's actions were extraordinary, yes, but they were also a testament to preparation, observation, and the unyielding human spirit. When faced with overwhelming odds, sometimes the most effective weapon is not superior machinery, but clarity of thought, courage under fire, and the audacity to act decisively. And so, as the smoke cleared over Normandy, the battlefield bore silent witness to one soldier's moment of brilliance. 40 German tanks destroyed, hundreds of lives spared, and a tactical lesson that continues to inspire. History often celebrates grand strategies and sweeping campaigns, but it is in moments like this, where a single human mind and spirit shape the tide of battle, that we truly understand the intersection of courage, intelligence, and consequence. What would you have done in Hackworth's place? Could a single person, armed with skill and courage, make a difference in the face of overwhelming odds? History gives us answers, but it also challenges us to reflect on the choices, risks, and ingenuity that define extraordinary moments. The battlefield may have been left behind, but the lessons endure. Hackworth's insane move is more than a story of destruction. It is a story of human potential, of tactical brilliance, and of courage that resonates across decades. It reminds us that, in the chaos of war, individual initiative can illuminate the path to survival, victory, and history itself.